For the past half a century, an ancient army of warriors has been quietly conquering the world. Wherever small battalions of China's famous Terracotta Warriors are exhibited, they win over a new legion of fans.
It was supposed to be a silent army, frozen in time to guard an emperor's dream of immortality. For decades, the Terracotta Warriors stood as symbols of ancient brilliance, carefully crafted, perfectly aligned, and strangely lifelike. But beneath that surface, something was waiting. When a new figure was pulled from the soil, everything changed. The placement, the armor, the traces left in the ground. It didn't fit the story we thought we knew. Researchers kept digging, and the deeper they went, the more unsettling the truth became.
All these stories that are circulating for over 2,000 years. Now that we have such findings, it'll prove that all these figures were true.
The mystery of the Terracotta Army is beginning to crack open. What was buried in Xi'an, and why is it making historians uneasy now? Origins of the Terracotta Army. In 1984, during a period of drought near the city of Xi'an, a group of farmers digging a well came across something unexpected beneath the dry soil. As they worked, their tools struck hard surfaces that didn't belong to the land. At first, they thought they had found some kind of old pottery, or maybe debris from a forgotten ruin. But as more fragments surfaced, a clearer picture began to form. An ear, a mustache, the intricate folds of what appeared to be armor, all shaped from terracotta. What they had stumbled upon was the beginning of one of the most haunting and extraordinary discoveries in modern archaeology. Archaeologists arrived quickly, and within weeks, what lay underground started to reveal itself. A silent army had been resting there for over 2,000 years, its soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder in rows that stretched across entire football fields. They were life-sized, detailed down to the laces in their boots and the veins in their hands. What unsettled researchers most was how no two faces were the same. Each figure had its own expression, its own mood, its own trace of individuality, like the ghost of a person who once lived. These were not statues built in bulk. They were modeled with a level of care and observation that seemed obsessive, and maybe even deliberate in ways no one fully understood. The warriors were just the beginning. As the excavation expanded, entire pits were uncovered, each one arranged with a strange sense of structure. One held infantry arranged in battle lines. Another housed archers positioned in attack. A third, much smaller and more enclosed, appeared to serve as a command post, where higher-ranking figures stood apart from the rest, surrounded by what looked like bodyguards and aides. There were also chariots, horses, and carefully positioned equipment, all sculpted in the same clay. Real bronze weapons had once been placed in their hands. Though many were looted or rusted away, some had been preserved so well that they still carried sharp edges and polished surfaces. Every part of the army had been crafted to serve a purpose, not just artistically, but strategically, as though the emperor had planned for war beyond the grave. All of this surrounded the mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor to unify China, a man whose legacy was marked by ambition, conquest, and paranoia. Historical records describe how his tomb was constructed over decades, with hundreds of thousands of workers forced to labor day and night. They built not just burial chambers, but an underground world meant to reflect the empire above. There were reports of palaces, maps of the land crafted with precious stones, and even flowing rivers made of liquid mercury. For centuries, many considered these stories nothing more than legend, until scientists began testing the soil around the central tomb mound and found unusually high levels of mercury that matched the ancient accounts. Despite modern technology, including advanced ground radar and non-invasive scanning tools, the main chamber where Qin Shi Huang is believed to be buried remains unopened. The Chinese government has long held the position that entering it could destroy whatever fragile remains still exist inside. Many archaeologists agree, citing how the introduction of air and moisture has already caused irreversible damage to many of the painted figures in the outer pits. Even so, the choice to keep the emperor's tomb sealed continues to generate quiet debate. The warriors above ground have offered a glimpse into something far larger and more complex than a burial site. They are part of a vast underground landscape that remains only partially explored, with much of it still covered by earth and mystery. As things stand, what we know of the Terracotta Army comes only from what has been carefully and cautiously unearthed. The soldiers, the horses, the chariots, and the layers of ritual and strategy in their placement all point to something that was never meant to be found so easily. The more researchers study the details, the hairstyles, the armor styles, the positioning of the weapons, the more they begin to realize that this wasn't just a tribute to an emperor's afterlife. It was a world he designed to keep something going long after his death, and that world still stretches quietly beneath the fields of Xi'an, untouched in places, waiting for someone to dare uncover the rest. And in the final days of 2024, someone finally did. A new warrior changes everything. In the final weeks of 2024, a new excavation began at Pit 2 of the Terracotta Army site in Xi'an. At first, the dig seemed routine, part of a carefully planned effort to expand the excavation zone without disturbing the fragile site. The work was slow, cautious, and closely watched. Then, during the final days of December, the excavation team noticed something that didn't quite match the usual pattern. Among the layers of compacted soil and fragmented remains, they uncovered the upper half of a terracotta figure that appeared far more elaborate than the others surrounding it. The face was sharply defined, the posture commanding, and the armor unlike anything documented in previous finds. It had decorative patterns etched into the clay surface, with traces of pigments suggesting that it had once been painted in bold, possibly vibrant colors. The hairstyle was complex, indicating a higher rank, and the figure was positioned near a pair of chariots, both partially damaged, but clearly crafted with more precision than others from the same pit. As the lower half was carefully unearthed in the early days of January 2025, the excavation team realized they were looking at something exceptional. This was no foot soldier. This was a commander. It was the first major warrior discovery in over 3 decades, and it arrived at a time when many believed the site had already revealed most of its secrets. What made this particular figure so important wasn't just its ornate appearance. It was the way it was placed, the objects surrounding it, and the craftsmanship that had gone into its creation. The position within Pit 2, which had already been associated with cavalry and flanking units, now suggested a deeper organizational structure than previously understood. The presence of the commander's figure in that area implied that military hierarchy had been represented in sculptural form, down to the individual command level. For years, archaeologists debated how much of the army had been mass-produced versus sculpted with attention to individual identity. Earlier discoveries hinted that only the heads were customized, while the bodies followed standard molds. But this figure broke that assumption. The armor wasn't just different, it was detailed with a level of complexity that could not have come from a standard model. Its stance was not just formal, it was intentional, with one arm raised slightly higher, as if frozen in the act of giving an order. That one posture opened up an entirely new line of inquiry. Were some of these figures designed to represent specific roles, or even real people from the emperor's court? This find didn't only excite archaeologists. It caught the attention of historians, artists, and cultural theorists across the globe. Was this commander part of a deeper narrative sculpted into the layout of the army? Was his figure placed at a precise coordinate to reflect a power structure, not just in the emperor's afterlife, but in the empire's political imagination? Museums began reshaping their exhibitions to account for this new discovery. At the Bowers Museum in California, where new pieces from the terracotta site were displayed in 2025, curators presented the commander figure as a centerpiece, an example of both the technical mastery and symbolic power embedded within the mausoleum's design. Some experts began pointing out subtle details that had gone unnoticed before. The commander's proximity to weapon fragments suggested that not all units were equal in function. His armor bore tiny ridges that may have signified a specific rank or affiliation. Even the way the clay was smoothed in certain areas hinted at a higher level of craftsmanship. These weren't just flourishes. They may have been part of a visual language meant to communicate hierarchy, loyalty, and control to anyone who dared to look closely enough. It's discoveries like this that remind us the Terracotta Army isn't a single work of art or a frozen battlefield. It is a system, a coded expression of an empire that valued order above all else. And when that system suddenly reveals a new piece, especially one that doesn't quite fit the old patterns, it forces everyone to look again and reconsider what they thought they knew. The commander may have been sculpted over 2,000 years ago, but in 2025, he stepped back into the spotlight with questions that had no easy answers. And yet, even that remarkable discovery is just a glimpse, because the biggest mystery of all still lies sealed beneath the earth, untouched. What's still hidden? Not far from the ranks of the Terracotta Army, under a large, grass-covered mound that rises like a silent hill in the center of the ancient burial site, lies something no one has ever seen. This is believed to be the final resting place of Qin Shi Huang himself, the tomb chamber where China's first emperor was laid to rest after building an empire with blood and fire. Unlike the pits filled with soldiers, horses, and chariots that have been open to the world for decades, this central tomb remains untouched, not partially explored, not temporarily opened, completely sealed. There are few places in the world where such a significant archaeological site has been so deliberately left alone. It's not due to a lack of interest or tools. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have already mapped the underground layout, revealing an enormous inner complex, complete with walls, possible corridors, and what appears to be an artificial landscape beneath the earth. The imaging data suggests that the chamber is large, intricate, and still structurally intact. But even with this knowledge, the official stance has remained firm. It will not be excavated. The most widely cited reason is preservation. Scientists have argued that opening the tomb too soon could cause irreversible damage to anything sealed inside. When the Terracotta Warriors were first uncovered in the 1970s, many of them lost their vibrant paint within minutes due to exposure to air. That loss was a harsh lesson, and one the Chinese archaeological community has not forgotten. They've maintained that until technology improves to a point where the tomb can be opened without disturbing its contents, it should remain buried. But not everyone accepts that explanation so easily. Over time, a quiet current of skepticism has grown around the decision to keep the tomb sealed. Some researchers and historians have begun asking whether the hesitation is truly about conservation, or whether something else lies at the heart of this long-standing silence. After all, the ancient texts that describe the tomb are filled with warnings and disturbing details. According to Sima Xi'an, the court historian who wrote about Qin Shi Huang's burial just a century after his death, the tomb was filled with deadly traps designed to kill intruders. Crossbows rigged to fire upon entry, mechanisms buried within the walls, and, perhaps most unsettling of all, rivers of mercury flowing through the burial chamber to simulate the great waterways of China. For generations, these warnings were treated more like legend than fact. But in recent years, scientists have tested the soil around the mound and found alarmingly high levels of mercury. Some of the readings are so elevated that they can't be explained by natural environmental causes. The levels seem to match the very rivers described in the ancient scrolls. If that mercury was used to create artificial lakes and seas within the tomb, it would confirm that the old accounts were not just symbolic, they were literal. The tomb wasn't built for beauty or peace. It may have been designed as a trap. And that raises a chilling question. What kind of ruler spends years planning a death chamber that no one is supposed to enter? There's also the question of who and what was buried with him. Qin Shi Huang was not a man who believed in traveling light. He expected his empire to continue serving him even after death. Some records suggest that artisans and workers who helped build the tomb were sealed inside so that no one could ever reveal its secrets. If those reports are true, then the central chamber could still hold human remains, preserved in toxic air, alongside treasures never seen by the modern world. There may be scrolls, artifacts, even blueprints of the ancient empire waiting in darkness. Or perhaps there's something else, something not written down in any surviving record, that has kept the tomb shut for all these centuries. The Emperor's army has spoken in silence for 2,000 years, and each new discovery around it has pushed the boundaries of what we thought we understood. But the center of it all, the place where it began and where it was meant to end, remains a mystery, wrapped not just in soil and stone, but in deliberate silence. The Terracotta Army was never just clay and stone, it was a message. And now, that message is starting to surface. If this shook what you thought you knew about history, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. What else could still be buried beneath Xi'an, untouched and waiting, hidden by design rather than time?